What's up, Sales Hacker community? Thank you all for joining us. Welcome to another Sales Hacker webinar. My name is Scott Barker, Head of Partnerships at Sales Hacker. We've got a great topic to chat about today, and the topic is how sales and marketing can prepare for GDPR in 5 easy steps. So super excited for this one. As we inch closer, to that May deadline, it's super relevant to chat about. So before I introduce my guest, I want to take care of a few housekeeping matters. Number one, we will be recording this session and it will be available afterwards in case you need to jump off or you want to share it out with a colleague. As you know, we love our webinars to be interactive. So with that in mind, please feel free to go to the chat feature, introduce yourself, name, title, company, size of your sales team. I want to hear from you. Our panelists want to hear from you, so please ask questions as we go through. For this webinar, we will be answering relevant questions throughout, and then we'll have a little Q&A at the end as well if we have time. We will also be having 2 poll questions throughout, so make sure you jump in and give some answers there. And then the final thing, just mention, neither Daniel or myself are legal authorities, of course, on GDPR. So anything discussed on this webinar is not the opinion of Sales Hacker or DocuSign. Please do consult your lawyer with any questions or concerns. So now that we have that out of the way, I would like to introduce our awesome guest presenter. I'm joined by Daniel Barber, the CEO at Data Grail, and previously worked and advised at truly some of the most cutting-edge SaaS companies on the planet. Like DocuSign, Outreach, Chorus, Datanyze, and Responsys, which was actually acquired by Oracle. Daniel, welcome. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks so much, Scott. I really appreciate the intro there, and yeah, excited to dive into this topic today, which I'm sure many of folks on the line are both anxious and eager to understand how they can prepare.
Definitely. Yeah, we're lucky to have you. And I know you aren't feeling 100% as well. So I appreciate you battling through the flu to educate us.
Yeah, no, thank you. Yeah, I will be consuming some water and the odd tissue in between. So if I go on mute, it's to save everyone a few coughs on the call. So
you're the man. Okay, so I'm going to admit right up front that my knowledge of GDPR is quite lacking. And as we get closer and closer to that looming May deadline, I think this discussion couldn't come at a better time. But we were talking earlier, and I think a great way to kick us off would be to do a quick poll with the audience and see on a scale of 1 to 5 how prepared people are feeling for GDPR. So I will launch this poll and give the attendees about 45 seconds to answer the question.
Great.
All right, so I closed the poll now. Some really interesting results and kind of what I was expecting. So we have 2% of people in the audience are very prepared. So only 2%. We've got 8% of the total audience feels prepared. And then we have 29% moderately prepared, 32% a little bit prepared, and 29% feel unprepared. So those are Those are staggering when you think that it is just around the corner. Thoughts on that, Daniel?
Yeah, I mean, I have to say it, right? I've actually wanted to do this webinar for a few weeks, and it's difficult to get people to come out and talk about how to take actionable steps to prepare for the changes in May. I think a lot of people are deferring to their legal counsel, which makes a lot of sense. But as sales and marketing executives, and even as, if you're an account executive, you need to at least understand the basics of what this means for you in your day-to-day operation. And I think a lot of companies are focusing on how do they make sure their product is GDPR compliant, which makes a lot of sense. That's very important, especially if you operate a software as a service product, or even just any technology product. But equally important is to understand how to operate the go-to-market motion post-May. So unfortunately, not that surprising, but certainly excited to share a few tips today that at least I've observed across the businesses that I've interacted with.
Absolutely. Yeah, like you said, it's not overly surprising. It's not really the sexiest topic in the world to talk about right now.
No, it's not.
When GDPR, as a sales marketing professional myself, what comes to my head is simply, right, okay, so after May, make sure you don't cold email anyone from Europe or you're going to bankrupt your company. That's literally kind of how I think about it, and I think a lot of people have similar thoughts. And I know there is so much more to it. So let's kick it off with a quick definition or overview of GDPR.
Yeah, absolutely. So sort of the points we'll be covering today. So you queued that up perfectly there, Scott. So first off, just what is GDPR for folks that perhaps have joined and are trying to understand, like, how does this work? So, the General Data Protection Regulation, it's a new EU regulation which will replace the 1995 EU Data Protection Directive. So that's a lot of jargon, I know, but it's related to personal data, and it's increasing the protection for EU citizens, and increasing the obligations for organizations who that collect and process personal data. It'll come into effect on the 25th of May, 2018, and it builds on the original directive's requirements for data privacy and security. But it also includes several new provisions that bolster the rights of data subjects. So you'll hear this term data subjects used quite a lot. Data subjects means people like you and I, Scott. So if we were to sign up to a webinar like this one, or sign up for a white paper, we are a data subject, meaning we are the person that's involved in the protection of that data. It does apply to people outside of, or I should say companies outside of the EU. So if you're a company and you have customers in the EU, it does apply to you. So an American company doing business in the EU, it does apply. And obviously if you're an EU business doing business in the EU, then yeah, it obviously applies. So it affects a lot of companies. And the term personal data is also expanded on significantly from that of PII, personally identifiable data, that was established in the US. So personal data meaning now anything that can identify the individual. So a name, identification number, location data, an online identifier of any sort. So not just, an email address or a phone number, or name, which was the typical sort of convention that was used in the US. It expands to anything that can connect the individual and refers to someone's personal information. It also applies to situations where information is listed online. So even information that is available and publicly available online is still considered personal data. So I'm going to pause there because that was quite a lot, and hence why we don't have nice thick blocks of text for this this webinar.
Yeah, no, I think that was a great overview, and it is kind of a lot to take in. But if I'm someone, I work actually remotely from Canada, and a lot of our Sales Hacker team is down in New York or San Francisco, and this will affect my life, my day to day as well. It's not just for people that are over in Europe. And I have a question for you, Daniel. Do you see, as this gets rolled out, do you think other countries are going to follow suit? Are we going to see a similar thing happen here in the U.S.?
Yeah, I would think so. The way this regulation was put in place, it's across the 28 different countries within the EU today, but it's very easy to see this transfer over to the US. As you probably know from Canada, there is stricter regulation in terms of what you can email and who you can email in Canada than there is in the US. Exactly. So that already exists. And it wouldn't be a stretch to see similar changes be put in place in the US. But yeah, I think obviously the EU is taking a strong position here. And what this means from what are the ramifications? Breaking the regulation can cost a business up to 4% of global revenue. So it's not a small fine, and the regulation does have teeth, so it is something that we need to adhere to and need to figure out how to prepare for.
Absolutely. And we've actually got a question from David Phillips that is kind of relevant to the conversation we're having as we kick it off. And David goes, so his question is, do you think there is a disconnect between middle management and the board when it comes to GDPR? Where do US-based companies differ in their GDPR compliance roadmaps and analysis? For example, are US banks or big asset managers taking a wait-and-see approach or scrambling to make the deadline like big companies like Uber and Facebook? What departments do you think should be taking the lead to meet compliance?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. So yeah, thank you for prompting that one. I think there is a little bit of a disconnect. I think at an executive level, the priority has been on making sure products are GDPR compliant. So that's been the sort of first and foremost effort at most organizations that I've seen. So the legal team will ensure that the product, so if you are at Uber, that Uber is compliant, the product, but the sales and marketing groups, there's very little understanding of what changes need to actually take place to ensure compliance. And so I would say that there is often a disconnect there of, at a very tactical level. So if I'm a marketing manager and I own the website, or if I'm a director of marketing, what do I need to do? So hopefully, we'll cover a few points today, and I have a couple of examples that will help provide some clarity, because I would agree that I have seen some cases where, we had a specific customer development example where a senior executive told us that, at their company, he's not aware of any discussions around GDPR, although he thinks things are okay. So I would take that as not prepared. But it's kind of you don't know until you ask. So I think the folks joining today, it's good to see a good turnout on this topic.
Absolutely. And yeah, that answer, I think we're okay. Would you gamble 4% of your overall revenue as an organization on I think we're okay? I don't.
I would.
No. Awesome. Well, yeah, I think that leads nicely into the next point is what do we do with our current database? You know, there's people that may be hearing this first time, or marketers that are panicking because it's been pretty common practice for startups or fast growth companies in the States to purchase lists from, a ZoomInfo or a Discover.org. What do we do with all that? Is that all data rendered useless, or?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think there's kind of a few points here. There's one that's consent and one that's legitimate interest, which we'll cover in explicit detail around the outbound piece. But I think related to your question of these lists that people generally have been acquiring for quite some time. It's really important to understand where data is originating and being stored in your relevant systems, right? So whether that is Salesforce or your marketing automation platform of Eloquire or Marketo, if someone has been brought in as a contact, let's say from Discover.org, then if that individual then goes and signs up for a webinar, and now that activity as a campaign is tied to that individual, and that consent, and I should stress this, the opt-in of that webinar wasn't under compliance with consent regulation related to GDPR, and it's very specific, meaning it has to be informed and unambiguous indication of the data subject's wishes by which he or she, by a statement or by a clear affirmative action, signifies agreement to the processing of personal data relating to him or her. So I just read the clause there because I think it's important. If that isn't done in the correct form, then that company is not in compliance, right? And more importantly, that consent needs to be provided, and this is what data access is implying. It needs to be provided if the person requests it. So data access implies that if someone requests that their information be provided, so if you, Scott, signed up for a webinar, then started receiving emails from someone, and you said, hey, I want to know what information you have on me in your systems, the company that hosted that webinar needs to be able to provide that information in a timely fashion. And that data access is something that most companies are not prepared. And more importantly, the original contacts that they may have collected and they have in their current database, some are opted in, some are opted out. Some have just been acquired through a list like you described. So you need a central way to manage that process and all those interactions. Otherwise, you're not in compliance. But the existing folks who have opted in, so they have agreed to receive marketing materials from your company, in order to continue those conversations in compliance post-May, you can re-opt in those individuals. The only thing is you need to actually confirm and save all of the information that was obtained through that consent process, including clear indication that they confirmed their consent. And I'll show you what that means in terms of a lead form as we go through a couple of examples. But there are a couple of very explicit points there that need to be covered in order for your lead form, as well as any reconsenting you intend to do, need to be set up correctly so that you are in compliance. Lastly, the data deletion piece, so of your current database. Similarly, if you were to ask this company, please remove my information, I no longer want to receive emails from you, the company must delete all available information on that data subject across all systems, and that includes third-party information that may have been collected as well. So it's very expansive, and that again has to be done in a timely fashion, otherwise you're not in compliance. So I know that was a fairly lengthy response, but there may be a couple questions there as well.
Yeah, no, I think that makes total sense, and I can see why people are shying away from this topic a little bit, because it can seem a little bit daunting, you know, reconsenting a ton of people in your database. It almost sounds like to me like a new job function, just deal or software that can deal with these requests of, you know, prospects coming back and saying, hey, what data do you have on me? Can you delete the data? That could take a marketing team's bandwidth away quite quickly.
Yeah, no, you're spot on. We have seen an influx of individuals focused exclusively on this topic, especially at larger organizations. Largely because, yeah, it's a full-time job. If you're a publicly traded company, mitigating your risk here is key. And, you know, there's likely many customer-facing systems. So it's not just Salesforce, right? Because, you know, yes, people's information exists in Salesforce, but it probably also exists in your marketing automation platform. It may also exist in your data warehouse. It may also exist in your BI platform. There's a lot of places where this data exists. So even the last point there of data deletion is not straightforward, and certainly not trivial.
Right. Yeah. And yeah, we do have a few questions from the audience as well here. And one I love, because it's actually a question that has been on the top of my mind, is this is from Candy Weir, is LinkedIn Sales Navigator affected, or is it exempt from breaching GDPR?
That is a great question. I mean, it's a question that I probably can't give it a definitive answer to be completely fair. But what I would say is that given that the information is user contributed, so someone is providing their information to a public forum, and they chose to submit that information, you know, that should draw, you know, less concern there. But, you know, companies pulling information from there, that's a completely different story. LinkedIn, you know, obviously is all user contributed. So that's a little bit of a different classification.
Got it. Makes sense. And then we have another one from Trish Vaskovich. Looks like a bit of a clarifying question. And she goes, so if someone signs up for a webinar and the form doesn't state that we will email them in the future, we can't keep them in our database? Or can we, if our privacy policy states that when a form is filled out, they'll be marketed to?
That is a great question, and I think maybe it's probably best we share a couple of examples. Yeah. Scott, I think that's probably the easiest way to describe it. So I'll flip over to the first one here. So I hate to name and shame, but Riverbed was one that I found this morning. So obviously Riverbed is a you know, large publicly traded company. This form is not in compliance, meaning that you know, the webinar that they're looking for folks to join, I actually signed up for it, and that puts you in a marketing stream of emails. There's no checkbox on this form, meaning I didn't explicitly state that I wanted to be emailed. There also wasn't a verification of my email that I wanted to be emailed. So both of those are requirements, meaning there needs to be a unchecked checkbox that someone can check to confirm that they want to receive email from you. So this is a super tactical point, but a very important one. You need an unchecked checkbox that someone can check and confirm they want to be emailed. I will say that the country pick list, which is why I put it in here, was quite interesting. Naturally, you get folks that come in from all over the world that sign up for webinars, and it's important to understand the originating location of the recipients. You can use, obviously, a lot of services that will pull reverse IP lookup to determine where someone is based, but it's nice to have a user-contributed piece there. If you don't have the locations of the folks that you've got in your existing database, that's probably a problem, because that now means that you don't know who's in the EU and who's not, so you likely have to re-opt in everyone in the database unless you can determine where they're based. But to answer your question, the important piece is, no, you can't email them, and you can't keep their information unless you've given them the opportunity to agree for that to actually occur.
Makes sense. That's an interesting point about, it seems a little nitpicky, but I know so many times when I go on and I'll, request a demo or something, that box is always ticked. They always kind of just assume that I want their newsletter or their email. And it's important to note that you have to actually give them that option now.
Exactly. Yep. That is required.
Yeah. So this is so crazy to me. So this is Riverbed, publicly traded companies with non-compliant forms. So if they continue to operate in this way, what happens? Do people have to report them, or what would happen to Riverbed if they continue to operate in this way?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think this is one that, I was having a conversation with a senior executive this morning, actually, sort of asked the same point. Like, so, is there going to be an EU police of sorts that tries to, fine individual companies or people? How does this work? Well, there actually is decent instruction around how reporting will work. And, if you're a data subject, you have the opportunity to ask, let's say Riverbed in this example, please provide all of the information that you have on me. I want access to this information, and I want to know how I was consented. And so in this case, the consent wasn't collected in a compliant fashion. And if the person is irritated, and I use that word in a PC way, but if they are irritated, they can file a report to their local directive, and remember there's 28 of those, and from that they can file a complaint to Riverbed for up to 4% of global revenue. Now, the specifics of how that will actually occur post-May haven't been explained, but I will say that the process to actually submit claims has been.
Wow. Yeah. Crazy.
So maybe another example, I think probably would be good here, Scott. So I'll move to Zendesk. So for the marketers on the line, this is something that I think I supported even myself 3 or 4 or 5 years ago. putting a simple message on the website, what's your email? And just a very simple message to get people signed up to your mailing list. This, 5 years ago definitely makes sense. Unfortunately, that's not in compliance today because, you're collecting the message. There's no box there to say, yes, I actually want to receive messaging from Zendesk. There's also nothing to indicate country here. So let's just hope and pray that the folks are not from the EU. And there's also no indication of whether it's a phone or email or what other information do you have on me. So it made sense, again, 5 years ago to make it very simple for people to just put in their email. But now in the place of where we are, we need to have better forms collecting this information so that we are in compliance.
Got it. And would there be any, I want to say, like, way around this? Let's say, this strategy has been working for my organization amazingly well, and the majority of our business, let's say, is in the U.S. Could they, everyone put their email down and then maybe use a data enrichment tool on the back end and then find out where those emails are from? If there are any from the EU, you treat those totally different than the U.S.-based ones? Would that be possible?
Yes and no. So for the folks that you already have in the existing database, those you need to now, if you don't have the country of origin, you probably want to try to work out how to enrich that so that you do. So to your point, finding services to work out which ones you would actually need to re-opt in, because you probably don't want to re-opt in everyone. But if you don't want to go through that exercise, then you would have to re-opt in everyone. On the incoming side, so new folks coming in, unless you can set up a dynamic personalization where the website actually differs based on the IP location, which is certainly possible, but it's very risky because also keep in mind EU citizens can fly to other locations. So if an EU citizen happens to be in the HQ office in New York, for example, they're still protected in the EU, even if they happen to be in New York. So, the consent forms, and I should say really the lead forms like this one that exist on websites need to be drastically revised in order to be in compliance by May.
Makes sense. Interesting. So, yeah, it's gone are those days, hey? Those were such simpler times.
Yeah, no, I agree. That's, by the way, this is about as sexy as this presentation gets, guys. So for folks listening, if you're looking for more animated slides, unfortunately, this is where it ends. But we'll keep on cruising.
So gone are the days that we can have simple form or lead forms, and then gone are the days are also when you can, as a BDR, SDR, inside sales, I can go to my data tool, export a bunch of leads to my CRM, throw them on a cadence, stock them on, whatever social media platform, leave a few voicemails, and then hopefully book a meeting. So under GDPR then, what do you see the future of outbound looking like?
Yeah, this is a topic near and dear to my heart, only because my time at Responsus, we were sort of the trailblazers, using the concept of predictable revenue with a segmented, specialized SDR team. For those that have read Aaron Ross's book, Predictable Revenue, Responsus was the case study in that book. So definitely feel for those wanting to understand how this changes their role and their motion. I think the important piece here is to understand there's two types of sort of information related to consent or legitimate interest. So we've talked predominantly about consent, meaning for inbound forms, for webinars, or anything of that nature, the consent component needs to change. So that's very important that for marketers on the line to focus on that area, as well as the legitimate interest, which I'll spend a bit more time now. Legitimate interest is kind of a little bit of a gray area, as even it sounds, legitimate interest. If you're in the motion of trying to contact businesses and you're in an outbound role, there's not great direction from from the GDPR regulation in this area. What it really means is, you have to, if given direction, you must supply some indication that there was legitimate interest. For your existing data sources that maybe you've done contact swaps for Zoom info, or you've uploaded contacts, in data.com, these things are going to be very restricted. So, if you are acquiring contacts that way, that is something that will land you in trouble. But the legitimate interest, it is kind of grey, I would say, at this stage. So I think we'll probably have to wait a little bit longer to understand more in terms of how that will work. But what becomes more challenging is when perhaps some of the contacts in your accounts do visit the website and they do sign up for a white paper or watch a webinar or interact in some capacity with your website. They now are in this consent zone, and hopefully they consented on a compliant form. But if they haven't, that creates a whole host of problems. So it's a bit of a thorny point, but I would say for outbound exclusively, we probably have a little bit of time to tell how this will play out ahead of May.
Right. We're going to have to see some guinea pigs and see what happens, I guess, from the outbound side of things. It'll be interesting to see how it all plays out, that's for sure.
Exactly.
Awesome. And so we have a ton of questions. This is obviously a topic that is underserved in the sales and marketing community. We have literally 50 questions here. But so I want to make sure that we do leave ample time at the end to run through some of these. But how does this affect, I think this is your final point here, is when you're going and talking to data vendors, is it even possible to how do you interact with these data vendors now that GDPR is in place?
Yeah, no, good question. If you noticed a recent post by Discover.org, companies are trying to adhere to this regulation in whatever means they're aware of. But I think the key piece here is, many of these data vendors need to actually supply direction in terms of how they collected this data, where it came from. So what was their specific method of collection? So that's a question that you should be asking any of your data vendors in terms of how did they actually get this contact information? Was it a swap from someone, or was it a scrape, or how did they get it? And then how did they intend to maintain the compliance of this information? Meaning, if they're selling something to you that's a legitimate interest, i.e. non-consented contact, that's okay. But do they have a method to actually maintain compliance of that contact? And if they don't, then that's a different conversation. If they're selling a consented contact, so they're saying that they have someone that is consented, and i.e. can be contacted and marketed to, that individual needs to be consented for your company, not theirs. So they need to show very clear indication that this individual has consented for your product, not their product. And they need to show information of how that consent happened, and be able to show and provide that data at any given time. So it does make these purchases challenging for larger organizations, especially because this data may live across many different systems. On a more ongoing basis, managing these contacts is the more challenging part. And so I would challenge anyone that's looking at data vendors today to ask, how do they intend to assist in providing that management?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so interesting. So consent, then you can't like pass the buck on consent. If I consent for company A can't turn around, sell it to company B and say that's consent. Consent has to happen at each organizational level.
Correct. Right. So if I got consent for, let's say I was a data vendor, I got consent for a particular company, that means I can contact them, but you can't, and I can't pass it over to you. If that were the case, you would need to get consent. So anyone that is negotiating with you related to consented contacts, I would ask some very hard questions of how that was done and how they intend to continue to monitor and manage that for you.
Right. Makes sense. All right. That was great. So many good points and takeaways from it. And again, judging by these questions, it's a topic we'll have to continue to dive into. But if you're open to it, Daniel, let's dive into some of these questions here.
Yeah, please.
Okay. So this is a follow-up question actually from Trish. So she's just wondering, so it has to be explicit consent, not implicit consent. Is that right?
Exactly. So you can't have a checkbox that's already pre-checked. They have to actually confirm themselves.
Got it. And then we've got a good question here from Daniel Paul. And this goes kind of right what we were talking about with data vendors. And Daniel Paul wants to know, in what instance could a marketing organization buy data externally to use in a marketing campaign under GDPR?
That's a good question. It's sort of related to what a lot of marketers will do, which is sort of syndicated contacts. If you're intending to market to the person, and again, you haven't got their consent, you can't do that. So unfortunately, sort of the bad news there, but the traditional methods of buying lists and then, emailing those people, you can't do that. So the way that you would want to do that if you're a marketer is try to drive, programs either through webinars, through white papers, through social campaigns, any method you can to try to get folks to explicitly consent for you to market to them. That's how you have to do it. So purchasing lists to be able to market to people, unfortunately in the EU, that's kind of done. Yeah. So the short of that answer is, can you buy data to use in marketing campaigns under GDPR? And that's just no. It's interesting. So it almost seems, the future marketer's job is going to be less about marketing their product or service and more about just garnering this consent to then give them an opportunity to market. Yeah, exactly. I mean, I would, on a one positive note there, it really becomes creating demand, right? I mean, this role of demand generation we love to glorify. I think it's a superhuman role because the best demand generation marketers or growth marketers, or it's phrased in many different ways, these folks are the ones that actually drive businesses. And if you can create demand on the website through all of your different vehicles and you get people to explicitly consent, that's huge. You start to create a movement of people that, are interested in hearing about your product. So I think it's funny, but it's almost getting back to basics of rather than buying massive lists and just emailing people. It's more about how do we drive people to the website, and then they will actually indicate that they're interested.
Right. So we're going to see, less of the traditional, buying database, and it's now going to be, building communities. And the cool part, I think, will be that these communities or these people that do give consent, they'll be much more engaged, and they'll be much more, what you call a warm lead than what you're used to seeing traditionally.
Exactly.
Here's another great question. This is regarding, we talked a lot about, consent and everything, but this is, so if someone opts out, are we allowed to keep them in our CRM as a contact, or we can't email them, we got to get rid of everything?
Yep, data deletion. So they've opted out, meaning that they would want their data removed from all available systems.
Got it.
So that's, again, not trivial.
Yeah, that makes sense. Here's an interesting one. If someone is a customer and they request their info deleted, do we have to do this when we need their information as a customer?
So that's a great question, and one I just had to refer to my colleague. For the purpose of legitimate interest, you could continue contact. However, from a marketing standpoint, you'd have to cease all marketing activities to that contact. Any ongoing product-related messages could continue, but anything that's marketing-related could not. And then you would be deferred to legitimate interest messages if you intend to re-engage that person from a product standpoint that they're not using today.
Makes sense. So you could continue the communication, just no upsell, cross-sell opportunities there. No further marketing.
Exactly.
And we have another question from Nick Nicolo. If I have a software that gathers contractor data, is there any way I can get officially certified or compliant with GDPR?
So just one more time. So you'd be gathering contact information?
Yes, yeah. So he gathers contractor data.
Contractor. I'm sorry, I probably misunderstood that. Is it contractor or contact?
Sorry, if I have a software that gathers contractor data, is there a way to get officially certified or compliant with GDPR?
So it depends in which capacity. So if you are, which most software companies are, a data processor, meaning you are, the information, so think about a data processor as someone like a payroll company. They're not actually taking any action on that data, rather they're just managing the data for other people to take action. So that does allow some leeway. However, in terms of getting certified, there's not a certification that can be completed. It's unfortunately not something that you can get certified for to collect data. But if you are trying to market to these contractors, in any capacity, then you would fall under the same regulation as anything we've discussed today.
Makes sense. Awesome. Here's an interesting one, super just practical, kind of to the point. And this is from Lori Douglas. So today, she said, do we need then to send an email to all of our EU contacts asking them to opt in to receive communications before the May 25th deadline? And if they don't do that, are we deleting them all?
Yeah, it's super explicit, but generally, yes. Now, the thing is, when you actually collect that permission, the challenging part is you need to actually be able to manage that, i.e. actually retrieve that permission. So it's great to opt in those folks, but, well, when they do it, you need to be able to provide that data at any time. So you need a way to actually, capture that and then be able to retrieve it. So before you just quickly go out and set up the email and start emailing all of your opted-in folks, I would think very carefully about how you intend to capture their consent and be able to retrieve that data at any time. And to give an explicit answer, if you don't get their consent by May 25th, then now you're in the zone of legitimate interest to contact them because they're not, they haven't consented under a compliant fashion.
Yeah. Okay. Got it. Makes sense. Okay. Well, we do have some more questions. We're getting close to time, but I think it makes sense if we do a quick another poll quickly and see kind of which topics that we covered today are of most interest to the audience, because there's obviously a lot of interest here. Just take 45 seconds to do that, and we can perhaps do a follow-up at some point.
Cool. Yeah, sounds good.
Alrighty, we've got some results here, so thank you for everyone who voted there. So overwhelmingly, about 50% are really concerned about the outbound. So how to prepare for outbound in 2018. More than half the audience really found that is an area that needs to be addressed. And then the runner-up to that was 33%. What to do, with your current contact database, followed by 10% improving inbound lead forms, and then 5% questions to ask your data vendor. Surprised at those results, Daniel?
No, it makes me smile. I mean, as I said, I have a soft spot for outbound in general. As unfortunate as this regulation may be, and the challenges that it may cause, I am pleased that people are still thinking about that function and that motion, because it is a motion that it does drive predictable revenue, no pun intended.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's also near and dear to my heart as well. It was always the outbound business development teams that I loved. It was a lot of fun. But awesome. Well, we're getting super close to time here. I just wanted to quickly thank you so much for putting up with all these questions, peppering you. You were such a good sport to run through it. I know a lot of these are nitpicky kind of legal questions that aren't that easy to answer. So thank you very much for that, Daniel.
No, of course. Thanks for hosting me, Scott. I'm pleased we were able to spend some time together on this topic today. And, if folks want to get in touch after the webinar, we will be putting together a blog post on the topic. You can also find me on Twitter at GaiJinDan. That's GAIJIN Dan. If you're wondering, that's Japanese for a foreign person. You can find me on Twitter and, of course, on the white pages of the internet, otherwise known as LinkedIn.
Awesome. Love it. And then quickly before I let you go, I know you're CEO at Data Grail now. How's Data Grail helping sales and marketing professionals?
I was joking with you before we got started that we are working with businesses specifically around this topic. I'd say it's probably a little early to share information specifically to what we will be working on and helping, but I can share that many of the challenges that we discussed today we're helping with a select group of companies to solve, specific to GDPR.
Got it. Makes sense. Awesome. Well, fantastic. Thank you so much again for your time, Daniel. Your insight is invaluable. And to everyone who joined us today, thank you so much, and good luck come May.
Exactly. All right. Thanks, Scott.
No worries. Take care. Bye.